Hey everybody. My name is Taylor Nicolaisen. I am a meteorologist up at the Omaha National Weather Service office. We're actually out in Valley, but tend to be tied to the Omaha area. I've been there about 4 years or so. I did TV for a long time before that, so that's probably why they sent me to do this speech today. Just trying to give you an idea of what we know so far about what's coming here over the course of the next few months, and how did we come to that. We could just send you a graph that says it might be a little bit colder or something like that, but we're going to try to give you a little more insight into what we're looking at here. So snowfall, it does start ramping up right about now. Typically areas north of here, so Norfolk, as long as you know your Nebraska geography, does tend to see snow first. Sioux Falls of Fargo, of course, we'll tend to see that before we will down this far south. But by the time we get to December, things catch up pretty quickly there. We peak in February typically. I'm from the Black Hills. I don't know if anybody's from the Black Hills, but that peak is a lot later in the year. This happens a little bit earlier here. And then again, it does tend to trail off quicker in Omaha and Lincoln than it does in Norfolk, which is up to the north there. So that's just average snowfall over the course of the season. We are heading to another La Niña. This is going to be the third one in a row, and we're going to try to tell you what that means exactly. But this is taking a look at the last 5 years here and how we did for snow here in eastern Nebraska. La Niña, we were pretty close to normal that in 2017, 2018. So, the end of 2017, the beginning of 2018. El Nino, got a little bit of some extra snow. There was no ENSO, or it was a neutral. And we'll try to explain these words here to you a little bit going forward. La Niña and then La Niña. So you can already start to infer there a little bit that La Niña doesn't necessarily mean a lot for snow in this part of the country. So this was basically a year ago, the end of 2021, the beginning of 2022, and an obvious hole of snow right in this part of the country. It almost looks like an error there, a little bit of a closer look. And Lincoln had the least amount of snow they've had on our records. Our records go back about 150 years for Omaha and Norfolk and Lincoln. That was the least amount of snow ever on record, was just 1 year ago. So that's one of the reasons we've got the drought going on here. You go back another year, and it was almost the exact opposite. Lincoln had one of its snowiest winters. So this is 2020, 2021. So a year beforehand, the third snowiest we've ever had on record in Lincoln. So both of those, both La Niña winters, so you get an idea that maybe it doesn't suggest a whole lot as far as snow is expected. So how often do we get snow around here? Well, if you're looking for snow over an inch or so, it happens maybe 10 times a year on average, give or take a little bit. That's for those areas there in green, and that kind of encompasses it. You can see that happens a little more likely by the time you get to the South Dakota state line there. About 10 times a year we'll see an inch of snow or more. If you bump that up to 4 inches or more, maybe 2 times a year on average for most of the northern plains for that matter. And then if you bump that up, double it again for 8 inches or more, boy, that doesn't happen all that often. Maybe every 2 years or so. So if if you're hearing a forecast of 8 inches, that just doesn't happen all that often. That's your storm of the year typically. So we're going to look forward to what we expect here over the next few months. We add in some computer models. The computers take all the current conditions and try to extrapolate that forward. We also look at what's happened here in the last 15 years or so, and that's becoming an increasingly important part of how we can forecast going forward, what's happened here as of recently. And then ENSO, that's La Niña or El Nino, and that drives a lot of weather here in the United States. And so we put all those together, and then we'll get that winter weather outlook. So I am not a climatologist, and sometimes I'm glad I'm not. They have all these different models, and a lot of times they'll come to a different point of view, these models. So these guys look at all these different models and try to come to a consensus, try to pick something out that maybe is a common thread in some of those models. Because this is just one of them. I just wanted to show you, this is legitimately for the next few months here. We go in 3-month increments, and these do overlap. So February is included in all those. And with climate trends, that's kind of how it goes. You kind of have to broad brush your ideas there. But you can see, at least in this model, it does look like it's going to be a little bit warmer over the southern United States, and that does include Nebraska. Not every day, of course. There's still going to be cold days, there's still going to be snowy days, but when you add them all up, maybe this winter will be a little bit warmer than normal. And for that, to put that in perspective, what we consider normals, we do 30-year normals. So that gets updated every 10 years. We just updated one. The new normals now go from 1991 to 2020, and that'll stay put for 10 years, and then we'll update the normals one more time. So just even compared to the last 30 years, it does look like at least there's a pretty decent chance, especially down south, but there's a decent chance that maybe we'll be a little bit warmer here this winter, which, you know, it's not maybe the best for moisture. A lot of times the moisture and the temperatures kind of go hand in hand, and that same model suggests maybe a slight chance that we'll be a little bit drier than normal here over the course of the next few days. So the lightest shade of, is that mauve, brown, something like that, about a 40% chance that it's going to be drier than normal. So again, that's not particularly great. As a matter of fact, if, let's say it's a 40% chance that Lincoln is going to be drier than normal, that's a 60% chance that it's not going to be drier than normal. So we highlight the 40 because that'll leave you, you know, with about a 30% chance that it's going to be close to normal, and then that'll leave you with another, you know, 30% chance that would be above normal. So that doesn't, that leaning here, that does not slam dunk that it's going to be drier. But if you had to pick, that's the one that seems to be in the lead right now. So that's what the models are kind of saying. Decadally, we like to go back about 15 years or so. So we take a look at those normals, which are 30 years old, and then we compare them to what's happened in the last 15 years. Maybe get an idea of how things have kind of been changing here as of recently. And the big one to me is we have started to notice, especially in February, but in December too, starting to see a little more Arctic outbreaks happening a little more regularly, especially the second half of winter. That was a couple years ago. We had one of the coldest stretches we've ever had around here, and it wasn't just us, it went all the way down into Texas. And again, that's only 15 years of data, so, you know, 1 or 2 extra cold winters can kind of throw that off a little bit, but it has started to be a trend a little bit, and that is included in where the Climate Prediction Center comes up with their estimates of this winter. Maybe a little bit more likely that we're going to see a big push of some cold air in February. Not a lot to look at for precipitation over the last 15 years. It's basically pretty close to normal. California, West Coast, boy, that's been dry here as of late. We all know that if you watch the news. So ENSO is, the big part of ENSO is El Nino and La Niña. They kind of go back and forth every few years or so, and what that is basically kind of a circulation in the Pacific Ocean. If you get kind of an upswelling of the water here on the West Coast, it'll be a little bit colder, if that circulation kind of goes backwards, so the winds on the surface are kind of pushing to the east there, that tends to pile that warm air up off the west coast of South America, and if those winds maybe not quite as strong, you start to get a little bit more of an upwelling of some cold air. And, you know, fishermen might care about that. Me and you probably don't care all that much about what the temperatures are, but it does help drive our weather just a little bit, kind of, you know, pushes it one way or the other. So this is the current ENSO forecast. Blue represents La Niña. We've had La Niña pretty regularly here the last 3 years or so. here's where we're headed into right now. So there's about a 75% chance that it is going to be La Niña here over the next 3 months. But what I look to for positive sign is that it does seem to be fading off here in the next few months. As a matter of fact, El Nino looks to be probably the most likely thing by the time you get into the second half of the graph here, and by the time you get into the second half of summer. So that's good. So if we can get something neutral, maybe precipitation will be a little closer to normal going forward, which is what I've been pinning my hopes on here. So there's the current, we call this the ONI. Basically it's just a measurement of how strong El Nino or La Nina is. And we're at about a -1, close to about a moderate La Nina, and that'll be important here going forward. But all the models show that kind of giving up, and we'll get pretty close to neutral, or maybe even start heading towards El Nino, which would be good news for our precipitation. So here's the look here over the last few years. La Nina, another La Nina, maybe kind of a moderate one, a little bit stronger one a couple years ago, and then we are headed there again. It doesn't happen all that often to have these 3 La Ninas in a row. It's happened twice in the last 50 years or so. But again, La Nina, El Nino doesn't have a strong signal here for the mid-Missouri Valley. Those of us living close to the Missouri River in eastern Nebraska, western Iowa, a lot stronger trends for different areas of the country. They tend to get a lot wetter in the Pacific Northwest during the La Nina. They tend to be a lot drier down to the south among the areas that have had the drought concerns just like we have down to the south. And then there's some weaker trends in there, maybe a little bit wetter in the Midwest, and we've seen that play out here lately. They've started to see their drought improve over the Ohio River Valley and the Midwest there. We really don't have a whole lot of trends here. Looking back through past El Ninos and La Ninas doesn't really give us much of an indication of what we can expect here. We've seen really snowy winters, we've seen really dry winters. Temperatures maybe a little bit cooler when there's a La Nina. That's comparing every La Nina to what we normally have. So maybe a little bit cooler here, but not a lot of signal there. And there's your precipitation again, doesn't give us much of an indication. Dug into La Nina's snowfall a little bit. If it's a strong, this is all La Ninas, excuse me, again, doesn't really show much. You can parse out that maybe you can have a few extra inches of snow in a weak La Nina, and we're kind of on the edge of weak and moderate La Nina. So again, maybe you could pin your hopes on that one. But there's really not much of a strong signal there. This is snow over the course of a winter for La Nina, maybe a little bit drier for December and January, and then maybe a little bit wetter towards the second half of winter. So if you take all the La Ninas and take a look at what is done typically for our snow around here, maybe a weak La Nina does show us a little bit more snow, but not all that much. Weak La Ninas, maybe a little bit extra snow, moderate, strong, maybe somewhere close to normal. So I wish I could give you a suggestion that, you know, La Nina, that's great news. It means this, count on this, but it just doesn't really mean that much here in eastern Nebraska and a good chunk of the northern plains. A couple of different other climate patterns that we watch, but El Nino is the big one. This one, you might hear about that a little bit often. It's the Arctic Oscillation. The jet stream tends to kind of keep all the really cold air up in the north, of course, but every once in a while that AO pressure pattern will flip-flop, and then you'll see these big Arctic intrusions of cold air, and we've seen that a couple of times here over the last few years. That jet stream weakens and starts to wobble a little bit, and instead of, you know, flowing around on a pretty solid path, that thing starts to flop around a little bit, like a river. You know, when a river starts to get old, it really starts to meander. it'll do that same thing, and that'll open the door for some cold air sometime. So those do go into that outlook for winter, but to a lesser degree. So this is just that actually CPC winter outlook. That's the Climate Prediction Center. I'm a meteorologist in Omaha, work for the National Weather Service and NOAA. CPC is an arm of the Weather Service and NOAA, but they tend to focus on climatology. We tend to focus on, Saturday's high temperature and the chance of rain. So this is the official outlook from our climatology arm, that a slight push towards cooler conditions here over the course of the next few months. Again, just like I said before, that is just barely over a third. So let's say, Omaha has a 35% chance of being a little bit cooler than normal. That leaves a lot of room for it to be something other than cooler. But that's what's currently in the lead. And then the temperature outlook for the rest of winter, not a strong signal. You can kind of see, if you remember what we saw, the main impacts of La Niña, it's a lot of this. It's a little bit warmer to the south, a little bit colder to the north, and you can see that pretty significant influence on that outlook. It also tends to be a little bit wetter in the Pacific Northwest we talked about. Well, there's that. It tends to be a little bit drier to the south. There's that. And here we are in Nebraska or wherever you're from, close to equal chances, maybe a slight tipping of the scales towards dry, especially over the second half of winter. But it's kind of hard to talk about something that when you say, yeah, we don't really know, but we don't really know. It looks like it's going to be a close to normal winter, all things considered, or at least there's not a strong signal of one way or the other. A couple of quick side notes here. Want to just show you guys the latest on the soil. This was maybe from about a week ago. Obviously, very well. This is just the topsoil. Basically, within a couple hundred of miles, everybody's very, very dry. Way too dry. You're talking, something that you'd see on the scale of every 10 to 50 years of topsoil being that dry. And then the root zone moisture, similar story, deeper down, and maybe not quite as bad in eastern Nebraska, but still bad nonetheless. Topsoil conditions, our records only go back about 8 years, but this one's obviously a very outlier here. This is for all of the United States, and it's more of a dire situation here in the northern plains, especially Kansas and Nebraska. And winter wheat too, very much of an outlier. Those records go back 20 years and is just much, much worse than we would typically expect. Of course, you guys know that. Temperature rings, so this is, again, about 150 years worth of data. I think there's 128. So we've got 128 years of data for Nebraska, and this is the 123rd least cool. So only, 5 years? You take all of Nebraska, only 5 years have been warmer than this year so far, up through October there. So very, very warm, and of course very, very dry. This is the fourth driest in that same period, going back to 1895, so that's a long time. Obviously California and Texas having some trouble, but Nebraska kind of sticks out there. Everybody around us dry, but we've been especially dry. And if you parse it down from a state outlook to cities or counties, there's obviously worse spots. That's an average of the whole state. So very rough. This is the second worst year for fire in the state of Nebraska. 2012 is the other year that sticks out for bad drought conditions. Much, much worse as far as fires. Was that 150% more than what we've already had here in 2022, but this does rank number 2. So I wanted to look at the current drought status. This was from, again, about a week ago. The darker shade of red, I don't think I have a graph on here, but that darker shade of red is extreme drought. That's as bad as it gets. And this is the first time since fall of 2012 that we've had that dark shade of red start to show up in eastern Nebraska. Just wanted to compare to the one that some of you guys might remember in 2012. A lot bigger of extreme drought, a lot larger of an area there. It does go all the way down into Texas. I would also say this drought was worse, no doubt about it. On a whole, there's worse spots now than there were 10 years ago, but on a whole, I would say this one's worse. I also wanted to point out maybe we started to get a little bit more of a finer detail than we did 10 years ago. That's just kind of a big old blob. So you might want to keep that in mind. But this is pretty rough, no doubt about it. So we're missing about 9, 10, 13, 14 inches of precipitation just this year, which really is approximately 50% of the moisture we would normally have. I should have put the normals on there. But generally you could double that deficit and it'd give you a pretty good idea of where we should be. So Omaha, typically about 20 inches of moisture or 18 inches of moisture at this point of the year, and we're missing half of that. So moisture obviously doesn't really come all that often in winter. It only accounts for 8% of our precipitation. Things really start to ramp up in spring and summer. So even if we have a particularly wet winter, and that's not what we're calling for, but even if everything came right and we had a lot of moisture, there's not much you can do. The wettest December to March on record, I put that here, maybe 9, 10 inches of precipitation. That's not gonna wipe this out. This isn't above and beyond normal. This is, the wettest on record. So let's say maybe double what it normally should be. Even if we had the wettest next 4 months on record, we're still going to have some pretty significant deficits for moisture from 2022 and the beginning of 2023. If we don't get any precipitation, obviously those deficits are going to grow pretty considerably there. So this is your range of outcomes. This would be the absolute worst outcome, no precipitation for the next 4 months, and this is your best possible outcome. If we had the wettest winter on record for your area, we're still going to be left with some pretty significant deficits there for moisture. So this is also from the CPC. This is taking that outlook, how much moisture you're expecting, a lot of different things go in this, but it just gives you an idea of what we expect that drought to do. And there's your improvement in the Ohio River Valley and the Midwest. There's your improvement from the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of that again is tied to what we typically see for a La Niña pattern. No strong indication of what we're expecting here, but we are just so dry that it doesn't really matter all that much. We are going to be stuck with that drought through the winter periods. That's why I'm starting to pin my hopes on that La Niña fading, and maybe we'll start to see some improvements this spring and into summer when that moisture can really start to add up. Not saying we will necessarily, but at least the indications aren't that it's going to be particularly dry. Maybe get back to normal and we can start to get some moisture in the ground there. So just kind of a quick look overall. Again, not a strong signal here, but maybe there'll be some cooler air outbreaks in February. It's been the case here as of late, and we've seen that where your winter's chugging along, and then right as winter starts to wrap up a little bit, you tend to get these big pushes of cold air. Perhaps that'll happen again. History for La Niñas, there's been extra snow in a La Niña like this before, and on average, but when you throw in the models there, maybe a little bit drier. So let's hope the models and the climatologists are wrong, and we can pin our hopes on history, which would bring us a little bit of some little extra snow, because we will need it. That drought is going to be here by the time March wraps up. And then just, again, you guys know how the weather forecast works. One day out, lots of confidence, and that confidence fades over time. Seasonal forecast, it's a different beast, no doubt about it. Different things go into it, but not a lot of confidence with those seasonal outlooks. A lot of different pieces go in there, and things can change. But if you had to sum it all up, it looks like No strong signal here, maybe close to normal, but there's just as good a chance it'll be wetter than it'll be dry, just as good a chance it'll be warmer than it'll be cold, which is not a fun message to give. That's and one that doesn't help the reputation of meteorologists, but no strong signal here for what we're expecting here this winter. There are some things that would suggest something a little snowy, but there's some things that suggest it'll be dry. So a lot of information to go over. Our website is free. Our phone number is absolutely free. We got people calling us all the time with questions. We're a federal agency. Our job is to help people. Our mission is literally to try to help people and try to help property and try to benefit the GDP of America. So we are happy to help you. Just give us a phone call. We're in the phone book, of course. Do have an 800 number, but you can call us on any of the numbers that you see. And we're there 24/7. So happy to give you some advice, or if you see one of our products, you'd like to see some interpretation there. We can walk you through it and try to give you an idea. That's all I have. The bottom line is everything's looking like it's going to be within reason this winter, within a normal winter, but not a lot of confidence there. It could sway a little bit one way or the other with temperature and precipitation. So love to send you home with a slam dunk. It's going to be wet, but can't do that. Anybody have any questions? Sure.
I'm from the Wahoo area, and it seems like during the summer, the front is moving almost coming in from the west. All of a sudden, they're going to put it out, or they'll split. So is that the flat river, or what's going on?
You know, I've heard a lot of people say that. I think it's probably just bad luck. But you hear it enough that, maybe there's something to it. You don't have to go too much further south from here. Missouri's done pretty well. They've gone through some dry spells, but the storm track has been, Falls City even has done pretty well in extreme southeastern Nebraska for moisture. They're still a little dry, but nothing like the rest of the state. That storm track has just clipped that toenail of Nebraska and swept up. So a lot of areas just south and just east of here have done okay. And that's what my experience is over the last years. It's just been a little bit too far south. And so, how strong that La Niña is, it builds up this big dome of high pressure over the Pacific, and then it kind of reroutes storms. And just exactly where that high is and exactly how strong it is, it'll just kind of steer those storm tracks just a little bit different. It's going to hit the Pacific Northwest. That's why they're wet during the La Niña. But by the time you get out to Nebraska, it tends to be less certain. And so some La Niñas, we just happen to be in the right spot, and it will be wet. And some of them, like last year, exact opposite. So it's just not a good driver of our weather here, or very low predictability by the time it gets here. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah, that makes sense. I would like to see that because, to get precipitation, a lot of the moisture will come from the Gulf or it'll come from the west. But a lot of times, you need moisture here to get more moisture. So the dry weather begets dry weather sometimes. If the atmosphere is very dry, sometimes it'll be raining or snowing above us and it just doesn't make it to the surface. So dry weather tends to drive more dry weather, and vice versa. If you're very humid, it's a lot easier to get rain, it's a lot easier to get a thunderstorm. So that's a good idea. I haven't seen that data, like what does a dry year follow. I have seen a long trend of drought conditions, and I don't have it with me, but that drought tends to go in a pretty, if you look at a long enough scale, that drought tends to go in a pretty reasonable back and forth. We haven't had too many droughts where it's, 20 years. That might happen in the West sometimes, but around here, these droughts tend to only go 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then they tend to get wet again for another 3, 4, 5 years. Not that you can bet on that exactly, but the thing I saw, that looked pretty significant to me, that it just doesn't stick around all that longer. So again, if you're looking for something to pin your hopes on, that's what I pin my hopes on. It looks to me like if the pattern continues, it's probably not going to linger that much longer. Like, looks, a good guess would be maybe a wet period. That's just probably half hope and half looking at the trends.
15-year norm that you're talking about, just out of curiosity, what's the case where it haven't come in 15 years? Now we're a new norm. What about 40 years ago, 45, even 60 years?
The trend has definitely been higher overall. That's your average temperature. It's not as profound here. Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska, we're one of the locations that has warmed the least over the last 50 or 100 years. There's some, when you take it as a whole, that large area hasn't changed all that much as far as temperature, believe it or not. If you dive into it a little bit more, if you're looking at high temperatures have tended to get not quite as high, believe it or not, around here, and low temperatures haven't got quite as cold if you compare in the last 30 years to the past. So your average temperature equals pretty close to what it's been, but your highs have been a little bit less hot, and your colds have been a little bit less cold. So our range is shrinking just a little bit. We're talking a degree or so, but when you get a little bit closer to the coasts, they're the ones that really show that temperatures have warmed considerably. We're actually in a little bit of a pocket that hasn't changed all that much. I haven't heard anything about that. You definitely get a small piece of, a little bit less sunshine when you've got, the jet contrails. But overall, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. It's just such a tiny piece. I haven't read anything about any geoengineering or anything like that. But it's such a big monster with so much energy in it that I think it's really hard to change it in any short term. A lot of that energy is down in the ocean, and so you're not just trying to warm Nebraska. It's this whole giant beast of a battery almost, and so it's hard to wiggle it any amount of time, any short amount of time. If there's a eruption of a volcano or something like that, that'll certainly drive it a little bit down. If you're just going to have a summer where there's a lot of soot in the air, those dips are obvious in history, but it's pretty smooth overall. About the Industrial Revolution, then it starts to climb up. Well, from my point of view, I haven't seen anything like that. I haven't seen any sort of chemical trails.
All you got to do is look up in the sky in the morning. Watch
Yeah.
those planes go, and then it just spreads out all over the sky.
Yeah, I think it's
You got
just
hazy sunscreen.
it's just convection, or it's just a little bit of some extra moisture, and it's just a little bit of some extra clouds. Certainly, that would have a tiny poke, but not to my knowledge. Anybody else have any questions?
There's some climatologists saying that we're due for a big drought in 24, 25. Have you seen anything?
I haven't. I'm kind of the climatology focal point at our office. Not a climatologist. I'm a meteorologist. But my duty is just kind of stay on top of climate information and stories. I haven't seen that. I'm sure there's some of that here, but from what I've seen, nothing to indicate that. Now I think the story is worse for the West. I think they're worried about. It's obviously been a drought for quite a while now, and I think the worry there is that could be mega drought, but I don't think that worry is for here. I would pin our drought of the last 3 years mostly on bad luck, and also, La Niña kind of stole some snow from us last year. So I think our news here is a lot better than it is 1,000 miles to the west. Going forward, now we're in a very similar spot. Anybody else got any questions? If not, you can always give us a phone call, and we'll walk you through the forecast. Sometimes our snowfall graphics and predictions are kind of hard to parse. We're trying to get away from sending out a forecast that says we're going to have 2 inches of snow. What we're trying to do now is say there's a 50% chance that it will end up between 1 and 3. There's a 12% chance that it will be 5 inches, or trying to give people a better idea. When you say it's going to be 4.5 inches of snow, then the likelihood of 4.5 is really low. So we're trying to give people an idea of the probability there. That's new, and sometimes it's hard to understand. So if you see something like that, give us a call. We'll try to help you out.